Hey, welcome to, this is Depot Street Brewing here in Jonesboro, Tennessee. My name's Justin Powell. I'm one of the assistant brewmeisters here at the brewery. I'm going to start off showing you how this whole process works from start to finish. Right here, we do, this is a load of grain for us that we make in our beer. We do 310 gallon batches, which is 10 barrels. Takes around 600 pounds of grain to make up a batch of beer. These are all in 55-pound sacks, so you can get an idea of about how much we use there. Right here we have our grain hopper and grain mill. Now what that does, we'll load those sacks of grain, cut them up and load them into the top, which is called the hopper here. We'll open this slide here, they'll fall down into the grain mill. That grain mill is basically two giant wheels that will turn as the grain's being fed through, and it will smash the grains into little pieces. You want to break the grains open, not really pulverize them, because then you will create wheat, which is not something you want in your beer. Or flour, not wheat, I'm sorry, flour. Here's some of the grains we use in the beer. This flat one here is a flaked barley. Once those grains get ground up, at the bottom there is a screw auger that will turn and takes the grain through the wall into our brew house. Okay, here we have our brew house, which are these two vessels here. You can see up top where the screw auger that I told you about that comes out of the bottom of the grain hopper and grain mill brings in the grain, drops it in the top part of this vessel, which is called the mash tun. Now that's where the grain will sit and basically steep in a hot water that gets all the starches and sugars out of the grain. From there, that process takes around 30 minutes. From there, this bottom part of this vessel is called the hot liquor tank, which is basically a big hot water heater. What we'll do after all the starches and sugars have come out of the grain, we'll take and basically rinse it, which is called sparging, with hot water. And it will flow through over to our brew kettle. Now this is where we're going to boil the what is now called the wort, just a sweet, sugary liquid that it is kind of like a early beer before the pre-beer, I guess you said. Here it is boiled, usually anywhere from an hour to 90 minutes. This is where we're going to add the hops into your beer that offsets the hops, offset some of the sweetness in the beer, make it a little more bitter. We'll add stuff like in our wheat beer, we'll add the orange peel and coriander into the bowl. When it's done boiling, we'll take and flow it through our pump back here that's kind of hard to see through what's called a heat exchanger, which will take, it's like a giant radiator basically. It's taken and surrounded with cold water, which as it's flowing through, that hot liquid comes through that cold water and contacts on the outside of the pipes and takes the heat out of the hot wort and gives you basically hot water in return. From there, the hot water will flow back into the spent, basically hot water flows back into the hot liquor tank where we can reuse it to clean tanks with and clean kegs with. All right. From that point, it's going to flow over to our fermenters. These fermenters are where we'll add the yeast. The yeast is what's going to eat all those sugars. And the yeast eats the sugars in the wort. It will turn the sugars into CO2 and alcohol, which are two of your byproducts of the yeast eating the sugars for the beer. You can see right here these tubes that come down, that's an airlock, basically is what we call that. You have to let that CO2 that's created escape your tank without letting oxygen back in. This process takes around a week or so. Once the yeast finishes eating all the sugars that are available to eat in the liquid, they will basically sink down to the bottom, which is why we have these cone shapes here. Once all the yeast it's done fermenting, the yeast is sunk down to the bottom, we will take and transfer this off the top right here. We don't filter any of our beers here at Depot Street, but we try to keep them as clean as possible. So we'll take and transfer the beer off the top, leaving most of the sediment and yeast down at the bottom. Alright, now from our fermenter, when the beer is done fermenting and all that yeast and sugar is pretty much said and done with, we'll pump it over here to what's labeled a serving tank, or called a secondary fermenter or a bright beer tank. From here, we'll take in this is where we actually carbonate the beer. What we do is we'll run a loop with a pump, and as it's looping through and being through that pump, we have a carbonation stone here, which is sort of like an air stone that you might find for an aquarium or something. It just it shoots CO2 into the beer as it's flowing through in little tiny bubbles, which makes it easier to soak into the beer. This whole process takes around 2 hours or so. From here, it's ready to drink. It's carbonated and ready to go. These tanks are jacketed and pumped with glycol, which is an alcohol and water mixture, where we can control the temperature of it. Most of these are around 32 degrees right now. When it's done here, we'll actually take and keg from these tanks or bottle from these tanks to give you the product that we're going to drink here in just a second. Alright, now after that whole entire process I just explained, this is what we come up with. Kegs of beer. It's a beer drinker's Disney World in here in our walk-in cooler. We keg the beer into half-barrel kegs. A barrel, which we do 10-barrel batches, one barrel of beer is 31 gallons. These are half-barrel kegs, which are your normal size kegs. They're 15.5 gallons. We also do some small ones here, which are 5-gallon or 6-of-a-barrel kegs, or otherwise known as pony kegs. And from the keg, there's many different ways our customers can purchase the beer. We sell these half-gallon jugs here called growlers that are real popular. These cut down on waste from bottles. You can reuse these, refill them. We also bottle 4 of our beers that you can find in grocery stores and retail outlets. And that's pretty much how the process of making beer works right there. Cheers.